Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister at the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 176 of the Midweek Bible Study. Hope that you are doing well. Hope that things are going your way. It's a pretty foggy night. It was foggy yesterday, and it was foggy today as well, especially when the sun went down and all that moisture got in the air. And so, if you're traveling, hope that you stay safe out there, and hope that you make your journey well. We always appreciate everyone who stops by here and everyone who joins us, for this study. We're getting pretty close. We're in the last quarter of getting up to 200 episodes, and so that should be, pretty exciting. But it's good to have everyone here tonight, and hope you're doing well. We always want to let you know that you have an invitation to come visit us at the Portia Church of Christ. Right now we are meeting at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and 5 o'clock on Sunday night, and 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. And so if you're in one of those, if you're around our area or during one of those times, feel free to stop by and see us. We'd love to visit with you, love to talk to you, and just grow closer as a body of Christ. I think we're studying the book of Esther for our class on Sunday morning, and we're studying the book of Acts for our class on Wednesday night. And so those interested, you might want to stop by and see what we can study out of that. But that's what's going on at Portia. And we also, as we always do, we want to let you know that if you have any suggestions, or if you have any comments about future episodes, or about what we studied tonight, feel free to get in contact with us. Send me a message. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And as we continue to study, continue to see what we can get out of God's word. We've got two people that checked in already. We got Jackie Henry is here with us. Hope that you are doing good. Hope everything is going good for you. And we got the Dunlaps as well. Hope you guys are doing good. Always appreciate y'all being here. It's always a good thing to see people checking in. But we're going to take our study to 2 Timothy tonight. 2 Timothy chapter 1. We're going to take a look at verses about 3 through 7. It's not really a very long section, but I think it's packed pretty densely with some good things to take a look at. But 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 through 7 is what we're going to study here tonight. And Paul, who wrote, the both of the letters to Timothy. As we know, Timothy was in essence, he was a disciple of Paul, but he was much closer than just, an ordinary, a disciple or just an ordinary, co-worker. But Paul viewed Timothy as like a son to him, like someone who had that close bond with. And so Timothy was a very, very dear, person, to Paul. And he wrote him, of course, 1 Timothy to encourage him and warn him, and to provide some instruction for him. And he's going to continue on here in 2 Timothy, and to get continue on that trend, and so that he can equip Timothy with everything that he needs in order to be successful in his ministry. But he starts out here in verse 3. He says, "I thank God whom I serve, as did my ancestors, with a clear conscience, as I remember you constantly in my prayers night and day." Paul, this is of course, the very beginning of the book. If you take a look at the verses above this, that's just a greeting that Paul has, to Timothy, my beloved child, grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and Christ Jesus, our Lord. And so this is the very beginning of the book, and he's still having his intro. He's still, kind of having this greeting for him. And he says, during this greeting, he says, "I thank God, whom I serve, as did my ancestors, with a clear conscience." Paul is someone who, and this is really quite striking when you think about who was writing this. When you consider the life that Paul lived, and the the things that he did and the road that he took in order to be a Christian, he says, I thank God who has served as my ancestors with a clear conscience. Paul had a clear conscience, and he would later on saying, I've had a clear conscience, almost all my life. I've always done the things that I thought, were the right thing to do. And we'll touch on that in a little bit more here in just a little bit. But he says, I give thanks, to God, which is, should be, I think, in my opinion, that should be one of the first things that we do with almost anything. We start out, something new. We should give thanks to God for the opportunity, for what we have, for being able to, go out on this venture, or to, start this thing, or to make this trip. We should give thanks to God that He has given us the means to do that. It doesn't have to be anything that is elaborate. It doesn't have to be something that is over the top. But if we just give a simple thanks to God for those things, I think that can go a long way. But he says, I thank God whom I serve as did my ancestors. And we know that Paul was someone who was very educated. He was someone who knew the Old Testament well. And he knew about stories such as Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and he knew about Joseph and David and Solomon and Isaiah and Mordecai and all these individuals who served God and who did these things for, and did some pretty incredible things, and God blessed them, and God had a good relationship with them. And that those were well-established stories that we can go back ourselves and read those stories. We can read about Joseph and Abraham and all of them as well. Go back to the book of Genesis and you can read that. But he was well aware of them, and he was also aware that the God that he served was the exact same God that had that conversation with Abraham about having a child when Abraham was 100 years old. It's the same God who who blessed Jacob. It's the same God who brought Joseph out of the situation that he was in. This is the very same God that Paul is praying to here. It's the same one that we find in Genesis and that we find in other parts of the Old Testament. There are some people who put out the belief, or put out the theory that there is a God of the Old Testament, and then there's a God of the New Testament, and they're two different beings. They're not the same individual, but they are. But based on maybe some different behavior, they can't be the same same being. But Paul doesn't agree with that theory. He says, I thank God whom I serve as did my ancestors. The God that we read about in the book of Genesis, who created this earth, who created the animals, who said, let there be light, who established, the boundaries, of this world and the oceans, and who, created, mankind himself. That is the same God that we find in the book of Revelation. When we see, the great worship scenes in the book of Revelation, it's the same God all throughout the entirety of the scriptures. There is no change, there is no alteration, there is no separation, but it's the same God that was there at the very beginning and will be there at the very end. And that can be something that can be very very comforting. But that's something that Paul knew all too well. But we want to welcome in Joy Callahan. She says that she is watching. Good to have you here with us. As also Beth Chapman Foster. She is here with us as well. And Donna is here as well. Donna, Vonda, Jim, and myself are watching. Glad you guys are here. Hope everything is going well on your end. And we appreciate you guys stopping by here tonight for this study. It's always good to have you guys here. But he, Paul here, he says, I serve the same God as my ancestors did, and I serve him with a clear conscience. But then he says, as I remember you constantly in my prayers night and day. He would, Paul was someone who didn't just, wish for something, well to happen. But if Paul was concerned about something, if he was invested in something, then Paul would, pray to God. And he says, I would remember you, constantly in my prayers, night and day. And that was something that, that is the way that Paul operated. And probably one of the ways in which Paul could get through all the struggles that he did was through this dedication to prayer. He was concerned about the welfare of Timothy. He was concerned about the welfare of the church. It says that he prayed night and day. And that doesn't mean that he was just in a constant uninterrupted state of prayer. But Paul was someone who he wasn't someone who forgot or neglected this responsibility, this opportunity that we have in order to have this conversation with God. And that's certainly something that I know that I could be better at. Certainly something that I could improve as far as remembering to go to God in prayer, night and day. And remember to, when you have those things that kind of weigh heavy in your heart, give them to God, and pray to God for them. Pray for the people in your life. Pray for the situations that worry you. You watch something on the news, and it kind of kind of frightens you, or kind of makes you sad, or whatever emotion that it gives you. Pray about it. Give that to God. If you're wishing someone success in what they're doing, don't just wish them success, but pray about it. Pray for them and their well-being. That's something that I know that I can be better at, and maybe as a church we can be better at as well, to include prayer in almost everything that we do. As he started out saying, as he says there in the first part of verse 3, where he says, I thank God. Being thankful to God and having that attitude of gratefulness goes hand in hand with prayer. And oftentimes, whenever I pray, I can't help but thank God for something, because God has blessed us so much. But we can I think we can maybe as a church do better at incorporating prayer in almost everything that we do. But in verse 4, as he continues on here, he says, as I remember your tears, I long to see you, that I may be filled with joy. I'm reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I'm sure dwells in you as well. He says, I remember your tears, and I long to see that I may be filled with joy. Paul is someone who, he says, I remember your suffering. I remember, the hard things that you're going through. Paul wasn't someone who just sent them out, to, preach the gospel, sent them out to spread the gospel, and just, left them out there. But he says, I know what you're going through. I know it's hard, and I'm remembering your tears. And I'm, praying for you that you can have the endurance, that you can have the, the strength, to get through, what you have to get through. And he says, I long to see that I may be filled with joy. Paul said, he had to write letters on occasion, because, Paul couldn't be in two places at once. And he nearly, any place at this time in the world could have benefited from the presence of Paul. But like I said, he can only be in one place. And so he often wrote letters, but he said, I long to see you, that I may be filled, with joy. And I've heard it, taught, at times, and it's an interesting thing to consider. We always want to be a person that would, fill somebody, with joy. That when somebody sees us, they can be, filled, with joy. That they can able to talk to us. We don't want to be someone who, if somebody, that, somebody would avoid, or in that case. But we always want to be someone who can encourage others, who can lift people up, and that It just, by our presence, we can fill somebody, with joy. It's interesting to think about, the how we go about things that we do in our perspective, in life. But certainly, Timothy would have filled Paul with joy if he was able to see him, face to face. But he says there in verse 5, he says, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you as well. And he says, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that is genuine, a faith that is deep, a faith that is not superficial or shallow, but your sincere faith. And this is a faith that is not just in you, Timothy, but it's in your family as well. He says it dwelt first in your grandmother, Lois, and then your mother, Eunice, and now, I'm sure dwells in you as well. And that's remarkable when you think about that. How important is family to us, especially when it comes to the gospel, especially when it comes to being faithful to God. Family can play a huge role in that. And the faith of Timothy's grandmother played a part, no doubt, in the faith of his mother, and the faith of his mother and his grandmother both played a part in the faith of Timothy. And you can see how that encouragement, how that teaching, how that nurturing could solidify that faith in God. I know for a fact, that, when growing up, my mom had me, in church, every time, the doors were open. It wasn't, it wasn't a negotiation. If you weren't, overly sick and you were able to be there, then, and the doors were open, you were there. That's just the thing. That's just the way that things were. And she played and still does. She plays a big role, in my faith. And I know family, like I said, family can play a huge role in a person's faith, in many ways. Because in this, in 2 Timothy, the only reason we know who Timothy's grandmother is and who Timothy's mother is, the only reason we know who they are is because of their faith, because of their teaching of Timothy, because of their contribution to the faith of Timothy. That was their lasting legacy in the scriptures. And it's certainly something that should be noted, something that should be celebrated in this case, because the success of Timothy was no doubt, he definitely had a personal responsibility to it, but he also had Paul looking out for him. He had his grandmother looking out for him. He had his mother looking out for him. He had a lot of support to get through the things that he was getting through. And that's why the church is sometimes referred to as a family, as brothers and sisters, because there's a lot of people who don't really have that family connection. They don't really have that family they can lean on to support their faith, and sometimes they have to go elsewhere. But the church should be a group of people that we can lean on, that we can treasure, that we can be supported by and also encouraged by. And when we're going through, whether we're going through good things or bad things, but the kind of the family element of your Christianity cannot be missed in anything that we do. A family can be extremely important, as it was here in the life of Timothy. But he continues on here in verse 6. He says, for this reason, I remind you to fan the flame, the gift, I remind you to fan into flame, there we go, the gift of God, which is in you through the laying of my hands. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. And so Paul here, he says, I encourage you and I remind you to fan into flame the gift, of God, and to be someone who empowers that, who nurtures it, and who helps it to grow. What happens when you have a flame and you fan it, or you give it, oxygen, you give it, air? It's going to increase, isn't it? It's going to spread. It's going to be increased, by the injection, of those things. And so if Timothy was going to fan into flame the gift of God, then he wanted him to keep, using it, keep improving it, keep, being someone who strengthened it any opportunity, that he had. And that's something that we can learn from you as well. It's not just about, once we, obey the gospel, once we are baptized for the remission of our sins and we become a Christian, we're looking forward, to that, bright future of serving God. We should always have this type of, attitude to fan into flame, to fan that flame of our faith, to keep, improving, and not to be, static, not to be complacent, with where our faith is at, but to fan it into flame. Be someone who always seeks to increase it and seeks to improve it and fortify it. As Paul encouraged Timothy here. And we don't want to be someone who is just going through life as a static Christian, but we want to be someone who is a servant, someone who is glorifying God with our actions and with our words, and someone who is not just a Christian in name only, but someone who has fanned that flame so that it touches everything that we do. And no matter what moments in life we find ourselves in, we know that our faith is going to play a role in that, and it's going to play a role in the decisions that we make and the words that we say. And I think it was certainly the case for Timothy here. But he finishes up this section here in verse 7. In what is probably one of the more well-known verses in 2 Timothy. He says, "For God gave us a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." And that's a powerful verse when you think about it, because is there anything in this world that can make us afraid, that can make us, that can make us to fear? I think there certainly is. And everyone's different. Everyone has different things that they that they value, but there's so many things in this world, especially whether you're watching the news and you see events going on in the world, or whether it be something that is locally in your life that you are worried about, that you're anxious about, that causes you fear. There's a lot of things in this world that can cause us to fear, and that doesn't mean you're any less of a Christian. Doesn't mean you're any less a servant of God if you find yourself afraid. That's certainly not the case at all. There's many, we read about many, Bible characters who were faithful to God, but they found themselves in moments where they had a lot of fear, in their heart. But Paul here, he encourages, Timothy. He says, God did not give us a spirit, not of fear, but of power and of love and self-control. And so if we remove, that fear, what does God, give us? He gives us, power. He gives us love. He gives us, self-control. He gives us, the ability, to do those things. And power, the ability to conquer over the things that this world throws at us, to go through this life and to go through walking that narrow road, not to be, pushed back, and not to be, pushed to the side, but to stay faithful to God, to have, love. Paul would tell the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, he said, there's faith and hope and love. The greatest of these, is love. Jesus would say in Matthew chapter 22, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love one another, to love your neighbor as yourself. Yes, the second of those, great commandments. You cannot be a Christian and not have love, because it has such a central hold of that. But we have power, we have love, and we have self-control. And how does self-control fit into this? How does this fit into those other two, such as power and love? Sometimes the world throws a lot at us. Sometimes the world puts a lot on our path, but other times we can be our own worst enemy. We can be the worst enemy that we have, with some of the things that we do, and some of the temptation that we face, that we may give into. We can oftentimes, the decisions that we make or the situations we put ourselves in can often, be to our detriment. But if we have that self-control that is strengthened, in God, in the gospel, we can avoid those things that would otherwise, harm us. That may seem good in the short term, but would otherwise, harm us, and we can continue on, that path, and we can remain faithful, to Him. Because God doesn't want us to be afraid, all the time. And there is some people who have that kind of that mentality about who God is. I think that God is someone who is waiting to strike judgment on anybody who is deemed worthy of it. As someone who is harsh, and someone who is critical, and someone who is going to, like, he has that aggressive nature about him. And we certainly know that judgment is a part of who God is. We certainly do not want to mislead on that front. Judgment is certainly a part of who God is. But Paul here, he says, God didn't give us a spirit of fear. He doesn't want us to be afraid, doesn't want us to live this life in fear, but He wants us to live with hope, looking forward to that promise. We need to recognize what the wrath of God is, and how we would find ourselves in that situation if we're someone who embraces sin over his love. But we can be someone who can go through this life with hope, and not fear. And we can do a lot of good. We can make a lot of success in this world, as Timothy had, if we're someone who sticks to that. But it's certainly something for us to remember as we're going through this life and we're facing these things of anxiety. We know that in the end, if we're a Christian, we have that hope of a promise, and we have a God who has been there from the very beginning, who has seen the very beginnings of this earth, and will see the very ends of it as well. He is on our side, and we have Him to look to. We have Him to pray to. And that's certainly an encouraging thing for me, as I hope it is for you as well. But I think that's where we will wrap it up here tonight. Paul is someone who encouraged Timothy to pray. He encouraged him to fan that flame. He encouraged him to remember those who had imparted to him wisdom, and who imparted to him spiritual instruction, as his mother and grandmother did. And it's definitely a great passage that we can remember, and that we can use to embolden our life as well. But we will be back here next week for another episode of the midweek Bible study. And I think we've already got 2 guests I know slated for February, and I think we may have a third in a little bit, or in the next couple of days when we confirm the date. But we're gonna have several guests here in February, and so if you get tired of listening to me all the time and hearing what I have to say, we're gonna have some new people coming in here, and I know you're gonna enjoy what they have to say. And as we're going to have a little bit longer episodes, but I think we're going to get some good study out of it. But until then, I think we will head out of here, and I hope you have a wonderful night, and hope you can be someone who is who keeps on that path, and keeps living for God, as we all seek to do. And we want to thank everybody who's here, and thank Beth as well. She keep up the good work. And Donna says, great lesson. Appreciate everyone who is here, who joined us here tonight. But until next time, hope you guys can go out and be the light of the world and glorify God in everything that you do. Catch you next time.